the potential for war, martyrdom, and even some spooky supernatural stuff.
My first thought was, oh, we're watching the New World Order emerge. That I think disorder is probably a better term for it. The last conjunctions came in 1989. It was a triple conjunction with Uranus as well, because this new conjunction's coming in Aries, and I don't think order is really Aries' thing. And when I first was thinking about this, my first thought was, oh, it's a new world order. But it's not really that, is it? It's more chaotic than that. We're pretty close to the construction of this totalizing system where everything that we do is kind of logged and watched and analyzed by algorithms.
Lunatic Astrology. We are entering a cycle of time, everybody, a cycle that has not happened in centuries. It's when Saturn and Neptune meet together in the sign of Aries, and history doesn't just repeat itself. When this kind of thing happens, it actually fractures. In fact, what Dan Waits of World Astrology Report calls a new world disorder. In our video today, in the next hour, we're going to have a deep dive, long form conversation with one of my favorite astrologers. His mundane or World Astrology of World Astrology Report is beyond the most amazing in the world. He really does know how to read the sky. If you're interested in our video today, we're going to talk about how boundaries on the map of the geopolitical world are likely to be redrawn over the next 2 years. And we will also discuss some of the mysteries of Gnosticism, the ancient thinning of the veil stuff, because that's a part of what Saturn and Neptune do together. We'll talk about geopolitical tensions. We'll talk about the authenticity of humanity as technology emerges that may make us a little bit robotic. We'll also, of course, talk about some darker themes to do with the idea of the Gnostic texts, ancient knowledge, but also UFOs or non-dimensional beings. But mostly we're talking about how the world will be impacted by what is going to be Saturn and Neptune in Aries at 0 degrees on February the 20th. And we haven't seen that combination of planets exactly at that degree for over 6,000 years. And if you want to really dive into this with us, get a cup of tea, a coffee, or whatever floats your happy boat, and let's dive in together. Like, subscribe, and please, this is a collab, meaning you can subscribe to Dan's channel in the button that says subscribe, as well, of course, if you're new here, subscribe to my channel. My name is Lori Lothian. I'm using the Western Tropical Zodiac. I am your astrologer using the sky to time your best life. I have a lot of products in my underneath my video, but most importantly, time your best life in 2026. Go ahead and grab the All Signs bundle or your individual sign. It's the next best thing to having a reading with me in person, which I am no longer doing. Now let's get to Dan Waits. I'm so excited to share him with you. You are going on a wild and fun ride with us together. So I'm so grateful to have Dan here with us today of World Astrology Report, because I have to say his World Astrology on YouTube is simply the best. Beyond the production value and the fun way it sounds like I'm watching a good history channel, he's also, I think, extremely easy to listen to because he doesn't inject his own personal politics into it, which I tend to do. So I do appreciate that about him as well. And so we're going to talk Saturn Neptune today as it moves into Aries at this degree, not seen since 6,400 odd years, but we have had it before in other eras. We'll talk about what it might mean for the world at large. We're going to go all over the map, from the potential for war, martyrdom, and even some spooky supernatural stuff. So Dan, welcome so very much. And I'd love to share with us a little bit about, maybe so people get to know you, why you're an astrologer, just, give them a clue, and what you're up to lately before we create this exciting interview together.
Thanks so much for having me again, Laurie. It's a pleasure to be back. Why am I an astrologer? That's a very good question. I'm absolutely obsessed with astrology. I couldn't imagine being anything else but an astrologer, because I think once you figure out that it actually works, to most of us, it's like, well, why wouldn't you be obsessed with this thing? What are you doing? You can understand life patterns, you can find meaning in all sorts of events, you can predict the future. I mean, why wouldn't you be obsessed with it? So I think that's probably the fundamental reason. And there is a long story about it as well, but I won't go into that now. But I'm still really driven, and it's all I think about pretty much.
I
But
love it. I love that you said that too, because my mantra on my channel is pattern recognition and cycle repetition, because it's literally, you're able to look back and then from the, the architecture of the past, it's so predictable because it's going to come back in some form, some way. And it is extremely accurate for general, thematic predictions, as well as sometimes with the asteroids, very specific ones.
absolutely, that's really what I do on my channel, World Astrology Report. I'm reviewing, looking back in history, looking at patterns, seeing what themes came up at previous examples of the kind of thing that we're seeing in the sky now, and then trying to make educated deductions about what might come in the future. And like you say, I think astrology is thematically predictive, very accurately, I think, very reliably. Being more concrete than that can be difficult, but as you say, asteroids are a very good tool for doing that and for drilling down and getting some color into the predictions. I agree.
I
And
love it. It's like, it's the punctuation marks and the emphasis and the syntax of what could happen. Without the asteroids, I think it's much harder. Yeah, just so people know, back in the summer of 2024, I remember, I think Dan and I were among other astrologers who saw that Donald Trump was in potentially a really critically harm's way situation based on the astrology. Most of us talking about July 15th, give or take a few days. So that's how accurate astrology can be, although he had asteroid Angel transiting his ascendant on the day of the thing that clipped his ear. And so I always said he must have had a break, So who knows, or not. So yeah, so I guess people can find you on your channel, and I know you are also having a backstage platform on your website, because I'm one of the people there. I just am supporting you because I never have time to go watch your stuff over there. But it's really a great little spot for you to connect with people off this platform. So is there anywhere else people should find you besides your members only website and your YouTube channel? And what else are you up to?
Yes, I'm also active on Substack as well, World Astrology Report on Substack. I'm currently writing a series of essays called The Hermetic Age, which is delving into deep history and coming up all the way to the present through the lens of various big cycles and trying to understand why is our world like this by looking back in the past and reconstructing the cycles that have led us to where we are today.
Well, we know why the world's like this. For God's sakes, Eve ate the apple. It's so simple. It was started there and everything went downhill after that.
That's true. We get a constant. I've got that symbol on the back of my computer right now.
Exactly. It all started with the apple. So yeah, well, we could talk about esoteric and Gnostic traditions and the, miscreation of not quite right God, but instead we're talking about Neptune and Saturn. So you guys, I'll have all the links to Dan's stuff there, but also as a collab, you'll be able during this to click through to his channel as well. So Dan, tell me, with Neptune, Saturn, Neptune to me dissolve, boundaries are loosey, goosey, foggy. It's kind of mystical, transdimensional. I have to see a lot of enlightenment episodes when people have a very tight Neptune, like a sun or ascendant transit. And it is kind of one of those planets that is so everywhere from the drugs addiction and things that we often talk about, like undefinable things without boundaries. I think of sometimes dry ice in a movie, there's no boundary to the fog that they're creating. And then at the same time, Saturn is quite the opposite. He's like, let's build a wall. Let's like create a structure. Let's make a boundary. So they're really antithetical energies in a lot of ways. And as these two beings of some sort enter onto that stage together and hold hands on the 20th of February at 0 degrees of Aries, what are some of your thoughts for how this will impact us, knowing that we've seen it before, like 1703, 1380, 555? So these times, we've done this before, AD, but what are your thoughts about this round?
I have a lot of thoughts. I could go on for hours about this round. One of the things that I've been saying recently about this Saturn Neptune conjunction is it's the New World disorder. I know my first thought was, oh, we're watching the New World Order emerge. That I think disorder is probably a better term for it. If you look back on the history of these Saturn Neptune conjunctions, you'll see, I don't want to say exactly new structures being formed, because they're not often as concrete as that, but like new ideas about how the world is structured or how it should work seem to come into being. And then we kind of go along kind of assuming this is how the world works for a while. And then there's this process of dissolution of old structures, sometimes in very concrete form, but then also, I think, a dissolution of the structures of the mind, our ideas about how the world functions. For example, the last conjunctions came in 1989. It was a triple conjunction with Uranus as well, so it had a bit more force to it maybe than they normally do. And of course, we saw the Berlin Wall come down, and this was the end of the Soviet Union, essentially. So we enter this unipolar world era with the US being the most powerful state in the world by far. And even despite that, we had this notion of what people call the rules-based international order, that really nations were had to act in line with international law and what international institutions like the UN and world courts and things like that have to say about things. And it was an illusion. It wasn't true, really, because ultimately I think force and power and all these kind of things were actually what was really underlying what happened. But at least that was the pretense. That was the kind of big lie, the imaginary that we lived under from that time. And what we're seeing now is that's just kind of been shredded now. We're kind of, it's not really a thing anymore. If you look at some of the things that have happened recently. So,
you mean like some of the very brash, in-your-face aggression that we're seeing in different countries, like as in Aries' exalted sun / Mars's war place? Yeah, it's certainly not like anyone's pretending anymore that there's certain rules that may have been fantastically possible 1989 in that Capricorn conjunction, which could be like, let's Capricorn, institutions of power and maybe land boundaries as well. Let's put a story together. I'm having a deja vu about us saying this before. Let's put a story together about how there are real sensible boundary rules that we're going to follow here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this new conjunction's coming in Aries, and I don't think order is really Aries' thing. Aries is really just about kind of following the will where it takes you and testing one's limits through action and so forth, right? It's not concerned, it's not worried about, what are the rules? It's kind of like, I'm going to do this. And that's really what things look like now. And we also have to factor in, traditionally speaking, Saturn is in fall in Aries. So Saturn, this planet of order, of structure, of boundaries and laws, rules, etc., is not comfortable in Aries. It doesn't function too well. Aries wants to move fast and break things. Saturn wants to take things slowly and build things up over time. So there's a mismatch there. So I think this new cycle that is starting now, as we can kind of see by the events that you mentioned, these brash, bold maneuvers that are being taken, is setting up this cycle of more of kind of disorder and of competition geopolitically, where different states are just trying to assert themselves using their force and power, and things are being remade. And when I first was thinking about this, my first thought was, oh, it's a new world order. But it's not really that, is it? It's more chaotic than that. And I think that has the feel of Aries.
I agree. It is like a bold new frontier. It's like somebody gave Captain Kirk in Star Trek some, acid or something, and he can't hold it together properly, and he's like still looking like the captain of the ship. But because I think of Aries, I always think of Boldly Go Where No Man's Gone Before, the old Star Trek series, and Shatner and all of that in the day. I'm a 60s, 70s girl, but it's like it's not operating. No one's keeping the rules. Like, what was the Star Trek rule of the prime something? You're not
directive.
Yeah. So the prime directive has been completely fucked. Excuse my language. It's gone. So we're going to totally interfere, and we're going to do what the heck we want. Like, at this point, I'm Canadian, guys, and most people know that. And Greenland's just my neighbor. So Greenland and Canada aren't sure we're still going to be Canada and Greenland at this point. And we've got Venezuela, we've got, it's a saber rattling at Iran. And there's just really nothing. There's just nothing that looks ordered for sure, and nothing that looks recognizable. And that's just from our first flavor, because last summer, Neptune, Saturn testing the waters jointly. That would have been the 24th of May to September 1st. Both planets are in Aries. And then Neptune got there March 30th to October 22nd, so stayed a little longer. But we got some sense of it last year, right? Like maybe you want to bring up your thoughts about the situation with Iran in relative to last June.
Yeah, well, I think after Saturn moved into Aries, we saw things start to feel really kind of serious and aggressive. I think in geopolitical terms, there was Saturn kind of brings this heaviness, this pressure. Suddenly, that's where the attention is focused in the domain of Aries, and of course, Aries is the sign of Mars, the war planet. And right after that ingress, there was this real, I think, intensification and a kind of new seriousness, let's say, in some of the already bubbling under conflicts or ongoing conflicts around the world. Ukraine was one of them, for example. I think just immediately at the ingress, I think Russia launched one of its biggest ever attacks on Kiev, and then at the same time, it had come out that supposedly the Ukrainians had tried to assassinate Putin, bringing down his helicopter, and that's been denied, but who knows exactly what's happened. It's the fog of war. But there was this real intensification that you felt there, and the same in the US as well, I think, with some of the internal conflict that's happening there, this the political conflict and this conflict over the idea of boundaries, almost build the wall. So there's this idea, I think one of the ways this is manifesting is this conflict over how much to enforce borders, what to do with people who don't obey the legal structures, the immigration rules, and so forth. And that seems to be where a lot of the tension is manifesting in US politics. And if you look at the US natal chart, it has its IC, which is the kind of foundations of the country, in the first degree, I think first or second degree of Aries. So this Saturn Neptune conjunction is happening right on there. And what we're seeing is this big tension between the federal government and the state governments around the theme of borders and immigration. And that's very Saturn Neptune, again, sort of the dissolution of borders, and then the maybe re-emergence later. So there's this sort of ongoing conflict over that, and we really saw a big intensification of that right as Saturn went into Aries. I think around May the 25th, because that was when there were these, I think, protests in LA. Trump sent in the National Guard. Things got very intense, and all the headlines were saying civil war. And obviously they can be they're quite sensationalist, and they'll exaggerate when they can. But astrologers all know that last time Neptune was in Aries was the time of the US Civil War. So, you're looking at that and you're seeing what's happening on the ground with what the planets are doing, and you're thinking, there's some quite worrying echoes there, right?
There are, and Pluto in Aquarius is also correlated to the founding of the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution and the revolution to create the country that is here today. Pluto's back in Aquarius, but now we have that Civil War overlap as well. So it kind of takes like the revolution against an exterior power and combines it with the fighting interior powers with each other. And then, and then we have, not to get it too complicated, but, when Uranus heads into Gemini and connects the United States to Mars, that's always been the United States getting in wars. So it's kind of like, this is almost when you said disorder, right? It is so many moving pieces all at once. It's really hard to pin it. Like we had a little talk in our green room, so to speak, before we started the recording. And I was talking about the martyr complex. And then you made me think of it by last summer's intensity with the ICE and the whole, federal versus state level control over immigration. But I also was thinking about the fact that Neptune, tends to want to bring us into a place where sacrifice is a thing, martyrdom is a thing, saints are a thing, delusion around those things can be a thing. And Neptune and Aries, as I mentioned, there was something called the 47 Ronin in Japan. And during Neptune and Aries in 1702 and 1703, these 47 warriors avenged the death of the emperor. He was killed and assassinated in 2000. Here we go. In 2000 and in 1701, and then these 747 Ronans scaled the palace walls or whatever, killed the guys that took over, but then they all committed seppuku and killed themselves, and now they're like revered as these noble historic martyr figures, right, who did the thing and then were honored for martyrdom. And I was thinking about not just Alex Preddy, not that he's a martyr, but he passed away just as a day and a half, before Neptune ingressed into Aries, or was killed just before Neptune entered into Aries. And I think that that's like, because more's coming out about it, more is being discovered, that's rolling into something emblematic, where we see the people are, I should have said unalived. I'll probably add up the other word. People are unalived by intention, and we end up with these situations over and over again where that can be like MLK, a place of, honoring the slain one for the noble truth that they stood for, kind of a martyr. And even the Charlie Kirk loss of life event on the 10th of September, Neptune was right there in Aries. And then bringing up this, because Alex Preddy, male, Erica's husband, Charlie, a male, youthful males. These are young men. Youth is the sign of youth, right? It's Aries. It's a sign of youth, bold, daring warrior.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we're seeing is how the sort of culture heroes.
Thank you.
Yeah, like the kind of people that are sort of held up as exemplars and stuff is shifting a bit with Neptune changing signs. And people who lose their lives in violence, in combat, in war, seem to be among those who get lifted up and become really important to the story of the culture during that period, when we have, I think, Neptune in Aries probably generally, but then also particularly Saturn in Aries as well. As you mentioned, in the 60s, we had Saturn in Aries, and we had Martin Luther King Jr., and we had Robert F. Kennedy as well. Kind of both were killed during the Saturn in Aries transit. And so there's something about, the individual like becoming very important to the collective story, and particularly their what happens to them through violence. And we think about Aries, this is the sign of the exaltation of the sun as well. So the individual, their reputation sort of suddenly becomes really important to the story. And unfortunately, we can probably expect quite a bit more of that over the next period with Saturn and Neptune both in Aries. It doesn't have to be as grim as that. I think we were also talking just before we started this about Alex Honnold, this free climber who climbs usually mountains without any safety gear. So he's just free climbing, and he just climbed Taipei 101, which is the tallest skyscraper in Taipei, Taiwan. And he did it live on Netflix. So it's broadcast all around the world. You can still watch it on Netflix now. And it's so Aries. It's just like right on the nose, right as this ingress happens. And it makes you wonder, is Netflix using astrology? They might be, who knows?
Talk about that Aries, daring, reckless, bold, scary, youthful, impetuous energy married to, the times we're in. And Saturn, and also Saturn will give, until 2008, it'll try to give Neptune some kind of structure, good luck.
Well, if you watch this thing as well, it's also terrifying. So I think that's where the Saturn is felt as well. This guy could die.
Well, yes, of course. Yeah, like Lord of Time and Karma, including like Grim Reaping. It's like time to harvest the life cord, Yeah, I can see why Saturn, though, gets that bad rap here, because, he's in the place of the exaltation of the sun, or if he's in Leo, he's in the natural domicile of the sun. And he's the farthest visible planet with ease, right? We can still see a bit of Uranus, but the ancient world would put him as like the boundary marker of the easily visible, but farthest from the sun. So he's not happy in the place where the sun would be happy. And so, yeah, I don't mind Saturn because I've got a good relationship with Saturn in my chart, but I do think that the part of Saturn that's really challenging is often about where is a way in which in each of our lives, collectively, individually, Saturn matures after your second Saturn opposition, and that's when you become more available I don't know if we would call it Saturn matures or Saturn lets you pick up your solar energy a bit better, but it's a time of maturity. And the way we operate after that age, Saturn doesn't, is not as a bit of a troublemaker in terms of the things we don't like about Saturn. But I would say that how do we gauge humanity in terms of a cycle like that? How do we gauge the human species as it exists now since the Younger Dryas decimation of civilizations that may have happened that caused like the diaspora of Atlantis or something? And I think that we can't tell where humanity is unless we're using the whole Yuga system. We don't know where we really are. Are we mature? Are we still infants? How we devolved?
Yeah, I've been studying the Yuga system quite a lot, and recently I've been writing about it on my Substack. Actually, if people are interested, I've written a few essays on it as part of the series that I'm writing, and I like the Yuga timeline of Sri Yukteswar Giri, who's the guru of Yogananda. He essentially linked the processional cycle to the Yuga cycle. So he thought there was a 24,000 year cycle, and we're quite early in it. But you might hear people talk a lot about, we're in the Kali Yuga, this age of darkness, and we, perhaps we are, but Sri Yukteswar had it ending, or the dark age ending in 1700, and then the beginning of the Dwapara Yuga, which he held we were in now, which is the energy age. So he said it would be a time when we come to understand the energetic forces and particles and things that underlie manifest reality. And he said this in 1894. And then just after that, the electron is discovered, 1897. And then Einstein in 1905, he comes up with this theory of relativity, and E equals mc squared, energy and mass are the same thing essentially. So yeah, so by his reckoning, and I think his model of time is really strong. I've studied it quite a bit. We're quite early in the cycle, but we're not at its very bottom. But we're still quite young, and we've got a ton of maturing to do.
Well, that does seem to correlate with things that have occurred since that cycle would have shifted everybody over, right? Like not just the actual physics, quantum physics, and science that allows us to harness different forms of energy, but even sort of a move toward like you were saying earlier. Can you bring this up, Blavatsky at all? Let's talk that, because this is so fascinating what you've seen. So talk about how you think that Neptune and Aries pioneering a new territory with new structure and form, and the other stuff that's going on, like the Pluto. We have a Pluto connection out of bounds in the South Declination for a decade, meaning people are revolting. People are pushing back, especially young people. But it does tie into the sextile that we're having right now, this age of return to gnosis, to knowing things, not information, not asking your AI, what the hell, knowing, gnosis, in different forms of inner perception arising at this time. And you were talking about that on a recent video, and I was just fascinated about it. And it's a cycle that has to be a part of what we're going through now, because it's a part of the Pluto conjunction, right, to Neptune. And we're spinning off of that cycle that happened in 1891. Yes. And this particular placement we're in, there's still that arrangement between the planets. Can you tell us a bit more about this, please? We love fairy tales on my channel.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've studied in most depth in my astrology is the synodic cycle of Pluto and Neptune, which is a almost 500-year cycle, 492 years roughly they meet. And this cycle seems to govern the intersection between power and belief. And it's kind of like the deep undertow of civilization, really. These sort of forces that are driving change from beneath. And you see big shifts when these two planets meet. As you say, they last did that in 1891 and 1892 in the sign of Gemini. And there are loads of themes associated with this cycle. You kind of see the sort of electrification of the world happening at this time, the building of global communication networks, cinema emerging, radio, all these technologies. But another thing that happens at that time is that you start to see all these Gnostic ideas surfacing in the culture. I think it was 1890, around then, there's the founding of the first Gnostic church since, I think thousands of years, really, or a couple of thousand years. A Gnostic church is founded in France. You have Madame Blavatsky spreading a lot of Gnostic ideas. And you also see around that time the unearthing of some ancient Gnostic texts in what's called the Berlin Codex. This is, I think, in the 1890s. Now, the Gnostic texts, they're concerned with gnosis, the idea that we can, through certain practices and rituals, we can experience the truth of reality. We can kind of transcend this flawed material reality and get a glimpse of the true world, above that. And so, yeah, the gnosis, I think, as you say, is a kind of theme of our times. And if you think about the popularity of a lot of practices that, that they're still very commercialized, but do involve individuals, say, having an experience of their own, a spiritual experience. We're thinking about the mass popularity of things like yoga and meditation and all these kind of things these days.
Oh, the power of now, Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
More, yeah.
Everybody's manifesting, and all this kind of stuff. And it's still, we have to think of this as kind of still early on in a cycle. And I think at this stage, things are very commercialized. Most people don't go that deep into these practices and so forth. But again, think of it as early. We're looking at a cycle that lasts 500 years. So these themes are going to develop more and more. And we're at a very interesting stage of this Pluto-Neptune cycle, because one of the things they do at the moment is that they go into a sextile, the first major aspect after the conjunction, for about a century at a time. And these are real, they're processes of development that kind of culminate at the end with a sort of new flowering, essentially. And we've been in this sextile since the 1940s. A lot of crazy stuff happened at that time, right? In the middle of the 1940s, insane. So we have the end of the Second World War with the Holocaust and all that kind of thing. We have the use of the first nuclear weapons. We have the invention of the computer. We have the UFO appearing in the world and the popular imagination. Like, absolutely insane for all those things to happen at one time. And this was really the beginning of this long sextile these two planets have been in. And they're really transforming us at a very kind of deep, profound level, both us and society in general.
And they're very tightly sextile in July this year. Again, well, we also have Saturn co-present too. So it's also, I wonder how Saturn will influence that, because you mentioned to me, or we talked about it, but I saw you talk about Nag Hammadi texts were also uncovered, those tranche of Gnostic material talking about the way the world's creation, in a different light, and that not all gods are nice guys, and that there's different layers we have to look at between what we think is true and what isn't. And also even the more real teachings of Jesus, which were really very enlightenment-y, they were very Zen-like. They were not like about a revolution and overturning the Romans or anything like that. He was really teaching like things that you would listen to a Zen master or a Buddhist or somebody else try to explain to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That, if you read the Gospel of Thomas, which is essentially the supposed sayings of Jesus, they're very much like that. He's teaching people how to awaken within, and what kind of ways of thinking about the world, like a Zen master might, will lead to that. So those are at the heart of Gnosticism, and the world that we've kind of entered now. It's very Gnostic in the sense that Gnosticism posits that the world is run by these forces called archons, these kind of inescapable, powerful forces that structure our reality. And we're starting to see human structures kind of take on that level of power. If you think about the power of algorithms, you think about companies like Palantir, where they have this, basically this global surveillance system. We can all, we're not maybe quite there yet, but we're pretty close to the construction of this totalizing system where everything that we do is kind of logged and watched and analyzed by algorithms. They're taking on this level of power. And I think it's really telling that the Gnostic Nag Hammadi texts are uncovered in 1945, basically the same year that the computer is invented. We have the transistor invented in 1947. So around that time, we have this technology that's really completely shaping our world and shaping people's realities in really profound ways. It comes into the world at the same time as these kind of instruction manuals, basically, on how to be in a world of empire is emerging. Because the Gnostics, they were thriving at the time of the Roman Empire was at its most sort of powerful and brutal. You know, this is the time of when Rome had transitioned from a republic to an empire, and there's something about empire and Gnosticism that go together, I think. So we're in an imperial moment now. We're watching these kind of tech companies or figures like Peter Thiel and so forth, who are very influential on the Trump administration and becoming more influential with every month, let's say. They're taking on this immense amount of power right now. And it's very interesting, I think, that we're at this last few years of this Pluto-Neptune sextile, 2026 to 2032. And all these themes are kind of coming together, because you can kind of see these forces are taking on a lot of power, but people are awakening to the realities of spirit, I think, which is essentially what Gnosticism is trying to bring you towards. So it's going to be a really crazy period. You know, we've got this sort of very disordered period and kind of an imperial moment as well, I think. But at the same time, people are awakening and are learning things that used to be hidden away and preserved for initiates. And I think sort of spiritual information is far more available than it's ever been. So it's a interesting times.
Yeah. And I was thinking as you were speaking about sometimes, you know, we see clues in fiction, like in 1984, the Orwellian Big Brother and all of that, like presaging or predicting this kind of social credit or control or algorithmic suppression or, you know, shut down people's free speech. That's happening now. That's already been predicted. But we also see movies and films and stuff that hint at other things that are much more magical, like Arrival and how space and time might really work. That's a great enchantment story if you want to guys watch the movie Arrival. But even the movie The Matrix, well, I have disagreements with it at many levels. But one of the themes of the movie, I mean, the primary theme is that there's a splinter in your mind and you know something's not quite right. And that is the thing. There is the potential. We're not in base reality, that you can call it a simulation. You could call it an artifact of some kind, but this is not where our consciousness resides. This is an experience we're experiencing this. This could be a prison. This could be like a prison simulation. Who knows? But whatever it is, it's not what we think it is. And quantum physics already knows that. And so the thing about that is, we don't need to know what it is. We need more so to know how to operate in it, right? And that's like in A Course in Miracles. You can make it a happy dream, or you can wake up from the dream. I think waking up from the dream is better because then, like, you know, in the Matrix, you go back in and you can see it's a dream, and you're going to move through the dream differently than you would if you thought it was actually real. But I think that the call of people to become, I don't like the word sovereign, because it's so new agey, but it's to be internally referenced, like to go inward for where your orientation point is. It's not about religion. It's not to orient from some like top-down dogmatic structure. We're in a time where if the more people are called, and I think they will be, to go in and orient from their inside out, and that's not thinking, that's being, that's stillness, it's quiet, it's opening to information, synchronicity, and intuition. That's not coming from the TV and not coming from your devices, but from some still small voice within. This is so cliche, but we do change our frequency level. We stop walking through the world with dread, fear, anxiety, right, and anger. And we can start walking through the world wondering, wow, this is a really weird simulation. I wonder if I can make a change here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm a bit torn on exactly how I think things are going to play out. But one thing I think is quite sure is that, particularly while Pluto is in Aquarius, we are going to see the empowerment of these technological systems more and more. They're going to take on more and more power, and they're going to be more and more invasive. You know, they're going to be asking to get inside your body, right? You know, people are, you know, I'm not going to having a go at people who are like fitness trackers and so forth, but those are kind of, I think, a step on the journey, right? Because you've got something strapped to you that's monitoring what's inside you, and the next step is well, we'd like to put a chip in you, and here are all the benefits as well. So these things are getting more and more invasive, and the question of, maybe you don't like the word sovereignty, I'm tempted to just say sovereignty, but something like that. It's the question of how to maintain our humanity, how to be true to ourselves in this very sort of strange world where we're dominated by these extremely powerful systems. I think that's kind of one of the things we're going to be grappling with over the next few years, when we kind of, and I think there's probably clues in those Gnostic texts, in that trove of wisdom, as to how we can do that most successfully.
Well, it feels like to me, like the brutal truth is things will get darker before they get lighter, or like seem worse before they seem better, because there's sort of like a collective inertia and exhaustion that seems to be happening with political shenanigans that are outside the realm of anything we've seen before. People don't know how to deal with it. And there's also a conformity pressure, because if you don't conform, you could be harmed. And that doesn't mean you're going to be unalived, but you could be deplatformed. You could be, like there's like a sense that you don't want to get in harm's way. This is so big, brother. You got to speak the right language, and you got to say it the right way. And God forbid you say something that isn't going to be okay. So on YouTube right now, they got all these new little metrics. So we're saying pow pow and unaliving. Now this is just to keep the advertisers happy, and I totally get that. That's also just advertisers not wanting to be involved in controversial topics. But then the idea that there are forces that want to monopolize media and control the content, like Palantir surveilling and Larry Ellison controlling, because he just does Paramount, TikTok, and he wants to buy another one, CBS, and he wants to buy another media outlet. I believe those are the three so far. And all said and done, there are rules about what you can say on any of the platforms that are under that umbrella of control.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's wise to just not put all your hopes in those forces going away necessarily, but to think, if I need to, how can I live in this world where these companies exist, this technology exists, and how can I retain my integrity, my authenticity, and so forth. And I think Saturn in Aries is probably going to put quite a bit of pressure on that question as well. The struggle to be oneself, we could think of it as, or the struggle to maintain authenticity. I suspect it's going to come up in quite noticeable ways in the next couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that one of the things about going through this journey, and especially Saturn, Neptune together in one sign until spring of 2028, right? We're going to see a lot of compression, control, restriction, the darker sides of Saturn in areas of our life that we may never have imagined it would occur. But on the other hand, I think we're also going to see a rise of enchantment and wonder, because I am an optimist. And I think that comes from things like we talked about earlier, the resurgence of ancient knowledge. Like, when Graham Hancock wrote The Footprints of the Gods, Fingerprints of the Gods, I read that book 2 decades ago. He was ahead of his time, because that book is now like the book, right? The whole Netflix documentary series about ancient civilization, the technological prowess, the knowledge that was had, the longer time span, like Göbekli Tepe, of how old these are not like 2,000 years, 3,000 years. These are incredibly old, 10,000-year-old structures. And it is like something that, if you talk to indigenous people, I was in Peru, and and I was also in Egypt back in the 80s or late 80s, but the guides coming from the tribal structures, like in Peru, like their family's family, and all the lore, that they're like, we didn't build this. Like, see that little rubble on top of that wall? Our ancestors built that. These ancient people built Machu Picchu, and they use sound technology. And that's why it's so precise. And there's such a, like perfected cut on these mammoth, gargantuan rocks or stones that are not possible for people in like hunter-gatherer style to create. And so, we like, the common guys who live there, whose ancestors lived there, they know that. We're finally coming to terms with it. So you mentioned something about Egypt. I want to know what you said something about there's a little bit of a pileup on the Leo eclipse to do with the asteroids connected to some inner mysteries.
Yeah, that's more. Right. Yeah. So as you say, this stuff is coming out. Graham Hancock's being, I think, vindicated at the moment. And a lot of that, part of that is, I think, has to do with the podcast scene. You know, Hancock's on Joe Rogan a lot, and those kind of figures, I think they're sort of partly driving this sort of new openness to these ideas. But then also last year we saw the Khafre pyramid, Khafre projects revelations with these visualizations of structures that supposedly exist under the Giza plateau. You know, if that's correct.
From a radar system, though, right? Satellite like ultrasound radar, or
yeah, they have a way of interpreting satellite radar data, and you know, it's controversial. Obviously, Flint Dibble and mainstream archaeologists don't like it and think it's bullshit and so forth. But we'll see. But that stuff was all coming out just after Neptune ingressed into Aries last year. So that's the thing. The background level and the bigger cycle also points to a recovery of a lot of this knowledge of our true history. So there's all of that, and then we have this eclipse coming in August at 20 degrees of Leo. And if you look at the asteroids that it's conjunct or opposing, we have quite a number of them that have to do with the Egyptian pantheon religion. We have Isis, we have Osiris, I think we have Nut, Neith, maybe one or two others. So there's quite a lot that's bringing an emphasis on the Egyptian pantheon. And also, if you look at the degree of that eclipse, 20 degrees of Leo, quite a number of, say, spiritual teachers and mystics of the past century or two have important placements very close to that degree, including Edgar Cayce, including Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, Sri Aurobindo. They all have placements near that degree. And they were all people that talked about Atlantis as well. I mean, particularly Cayce, of course, who gave tons of readings about people's past lives in Atlantis and so forth. So it just feels to me like those things are going to be coming out a lot more if you consider what happened last year already, and then you see that eclipse coming and the way it's hitting all those charts. It just makes me think that a lot of interesting stuff is going to be coming out. So at the same time as we got these, they got this new world disorder and this rise of the archons happening, there's also something more hopeful happening as well. People are becoming more alive to spirit, and things are going to come out. I'm pretty certain of it, particularly towards the middle of this year. And I was reading a tweet the other day, and this could be nonsense. There's a lot of rumors circulating, obviously, but they were suggesting that Trump has already written a UFO disclosure speech, and the plan is for him to give it in July of 2026. Now, take that with a pinch of salt. You probably should, but I found it interesting that that's kind of in the window of effect of this eclipse. It's also when we've got this big, really unique configuration of all the outer planets, and so the timing of that I find quite
well. I guess Trump's administration has a secret astrologer, because really it is that almost perfected mini grand trine is forming. It's really going to be tightly opened up between Neptune and Pluto and Uranus, and just before the eclipse, like in the second half of July, and during the eclipse too, Imhotep, just before the eclipse. So in a couple of weeks before the eclipse, Imhotep is conjunct Saturn with Neptune but nearby in Aries. And at the same time, we have Uranus, Mars, and the asteroid Atlantis. So, and they're all bound together, Mars, Uranus, and Atlantis, also in mid to late July. And so and every time we think about Atlantis, I always think about, I think about two things. I think about the myth that Atlantis had pride and hubris and perhaps technological overreach. So there's an idea that they were using sound grids or energy lines or whatever, and then they got greedy with tech, and they basically disturbed the reality of structures, and they sunk. Well, if we're going to get greedy and harm ourselves with tech, it's going to be AI. But then the other part of that is it is about what something that's been lost, like a knowledge of a place that has been hinted at and talked about by Plato, and everyone, talks about it, and there's mysteries and there's some information about it, of course, in the records, but like we don't know where it is. We don't have any proof yet. And so that could be the uncovering of an ancient lost civilization at the depth of not just like, what is that under the, the rainforest? No, I mean, like, hopefully, like information. And the guys, the Italian scientist team or whatever, who were doing, I think it's an Italian and a Scottish guy who were doing all of that. They put out a notice in November. I think it was like November the 8th. Wait and see. In the new year, we're making a big announcement. It's going to knock your socks off. Nothing. They haven't done anything. They said, we got an amazing announcement coming.
Right. Yeah. That's something that's on my radar. And another thing as well, just to come back to Saturn Neptune as well, is there's something interesting going on with those conjunctions. And I think they have to do with some sort of thinning of the veil, right? If Saturn is manifest reality, then Neptune kind of dissolves it a bit and gets us a little bit closer to the spiritual realm beyond, perhaps you could say. And if so, 1917, we have one of these conjunctions, and this is the year of the miracle of Fatima, where the three shepherd children in Portugal had these visions of Mary, and then it culminated at the end with what's called the miracle of the sun, where thousands of people gathered and they saw this amazing event in the sky where the sun appeared to like zigzag along, and all these.
You mean like a UFO?
Exactly like a UFO, and a lot of UFO researchers like Jacques Vallée have said this is very similar to a lot of UFO experiences, but it was seen by thousands of people. That was at one of these conjunctions, which is kind of interesting. Especially the other thing that comes to mind for me, and I'm not sure what to make of this. I don't want to put too much emphasis on it, because it could all be some kind of CIA psyop, blah blah blah. But we have this figure of Chris Bledsoe, who's a UFO experiencer. He strikes me as earnest. I kind of listen to him, and I think he's telling the truth about his own experience at the very least. But he believes that he's been encountering a sort of divine feminine presence, like Hathor or Mary, kind of one of these kind of figures. And she's given him a lot of information. She gave him the power to heal people, supposedly. And she told him that in 2026, there was going to be a, quote, new knowledge coming into the world. As we discussed earlier, there's something a bit garbled about the prediction, because she told him when the red star of Regulus rises in the gaze of the Sphinx, this would happen. Now, as we said earlier, Regulus is not a red star, but it does rise. It makes its heliacal rise and rises in the east. The Sphinx faces east in, I think it's September, October of this year.
I think it's October 7th.
October 7th, right? Okay, interesting. But Bledsoe has also been saying that he's been told by other people that this event actually happens in
April.
March or April, yeah. So I've also heard that quite a lot of people in, say, the UFO scene and some people in the know on certain things are gathering in Egypt around that time. This could all just be sort of rumor mill, and who knows, but it's kind of interesting given what the astrology is saying and a lot of the other things that are lining up, and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is not just a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it's also got all this influence from Pluto and Uranus as well. It's kind of
and that's kind of why I wanted you to draw in that whole sextile cycle that we're in, that corresponded with the 1945, the Nag Hammadi, because we're also spinning. It's like, it's a very complicated shawl we're doing here. We've got the threads from the conjunction of Pluto and Neptune that are spinning from the late 1800s into the sextile, that are bleeding through Saturn and Neptune in the sign of Aries, not seen together there since the 1700s, 1701, 2, 3 or so, 4. And so there's so many overlaying timeframes, which, by the way, is a good lesson for the audience who's listening. Even though astrology does repeat itself, right? The cycle is history rhymes, we can say history rhymes. But the truth is that reality is like a kaleidoscope. And you know how you have all these glass or plastic pieces in the end of your kaleidoscope, and you just turn it a bit and it makes a unique signature. It's not, everything is changing. So the alignments are similar in certain ways, but not under the backdrop of a certain other sky. And so you can't perfectly compare. And like it makes me think, Dan, that like Pluto out of bounds, thank you to Roseanne Finn, right? We now have good historical data that southern declination out of bound period, and we're in the decade of that, continuously out of bounds, usually late summer to late fall in the south declination isn't where people let power control them and lord over them, especially top down nefarious structures, but rather it flips the upside down way and people push against those structures, aka French Revolution, American Revolution, Protestant Reformation. And so, even though Big Brother's pushing down, right, pushing down on us with control structures, at the same time, we're in a cycle where people usually take the power back.
Yeah, that's true. It's such a complex brew, a complex network of historical resonances and symbols and stuff. It's difficult to
All right.
make clear predictions on this. I think one other thing that we didn't quite get to that's important to mention is that
Yes.
certain countries have a resonance with the Saturn Neptune cycle as well. And so there's certain places that I think we need to be watching quite closely over the next year, let's say. And one of them is Russia. I think it's very well known by now that Russian history resonates to this cycle almost like clockwork. One thing that I saw looking back at Russian history and Saturn-Neptune conjunctions is that it tends to be a redrawing of the boundaries of Russia, a refixing of them at the time of these conjunctions. In the 20th century, you also saw regime changes. So a lot of people are wondering if that's going to happen this time. But the consistent theme seems to be redrawing of the border between Russia and the West. If you go back to 1703, the last time one of these conjunctions happened in Aries, we have the founding of St. Petersburg. Russia gets access to the Baltic and orients towards the West. And it's a really big moment in Russian history. But there wasn't really a change of regime then. It was a sort of change of the Russian border and orientation to the West. So while yeah, perhaps there could be a change of regime, I think we have to hold different scenarios in mind. I'd also wonder if we're going to see at some point a sort of fixing of the boundary between Russia and Ukraine as well during this period. So Russia is one of those countries. Iran is another country that has this kind of resonance. You tend to see regime changes in Iran at these conjunctions. For example, 1989, you had the Ayatollah died and the current one took over. So, obviously things are happening in Iran right now as well, like clockwork. And Japan is another place to watch as well. It also seems to resonate to Saturn Neptune. And the Prime Minister of Japan just dissolved the government, and bond yields for Japan, I think they're soaring. They're very, very high right now, which indicates there's not much confidence in the future of Japan's economy right now. And so there's a resonance there. Like at the last conjunction, 1989, the Japanese Nikkei exchange reached its highest ever value. It was like the peak of the Japanese bubble. And since then, they've had a lot more trouble with their economy. But yeah, so Japan is another place to watch. And yeah, some of these countries are definitely going to be in the news quite a bit, I think, potentially in February, but also just more broadly over the course of this year.
Yeah, I certainly can see Iran because it does have an Aries sun. I always forget. There's a Sag rising chart. I like the Leo 17-degree chart myself. I think that that might be the chart. One of those two has the Aries sun. So with that Aries sun, we can pretty well count on just having that combination of Saturn Neptune in Aries period for 3 years to April of 2028. I can't see how, yeah, like you said, the Ayatollah 89 and the Berlin Wall and Russia falling into new territory. Those things have to repeat because it's cycle repetition and pattern recognition. But there's going to be ways in which we see it coming to pass in unusual ways that are different, that we can't quite compare. We've got, other factors in the mix like Uranus and like Pluto and like the minor asteroids. But yeah, like those are hotbeds for sure. And, yeah, I kind of feel like, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say the difficulty with all this is we can never isolate the factors in a lab and say, just what does Saturn in Aries do and separate it from everything else that's going on. So I think that's why you can historical research is important, essential, but it also won't ever tell you exactly what's going to happen because the condition is always always new. So we only
Okay,
have a sample
I
size of
agree.
one.
I agree. Like Pluto in Aquarius has been associated with the formation of new, well, as you and I've talked before, meeting the other, meeting the four alien, like, the Spaniards and the North American, Incas meeting. Hi, guys, you look different. So, hi, aliens on the White House lawn, you look different. But then the other thing is the idea that, there has been precedent where these microeconomies or new economic alliances form underneath umbrellas of older crumbling empire structures. And we have the BRICS nations that have been building up quite a lot of strength since 2023 March, when we saw Pluto begin his journey through Aquarius. And, one thing that could disrupt the pattern, like say with Iran, is that, not likely Russia, but China says, bugger off. I don't know if they have the power to do that right now. They're a hot mess too. But like, it's not, there's already a connection between Iran and China and Russia. They're all together in the BRICS, and they're allies for each other on multiple fronts. And then now United States will try, with its ally that away, and the ME, I don't want to say it here, it's shadow ban, to do an overthrow. It's really about a destabilization. Just wants to destabilize the only threat to the big neighbor with the power in the neighborhood of the pit bull that's rapidly raging there in the Middle East. Wink, wink.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's definitely a big part of it, this BRICS aspect. And something else that's going on that's interesting, I think, on to this end, is this new organization that Trump's set up, the Board of Peace, so-called, which is, a lot of people are saying, kind of seems to be wanting to take on a lot of responsibilities that are related to the mandate of the UN. And China is actually quite relatively committed to the UN. I think it's become quite influential in the UN and over a lot of the UN institutions. And I think China would quite like things to be run through the UN, perhaps. But we're seeing this new structure being established by Trump, and it's very Aries again. And it's all kind of like he's the permanent head of this new organization, I think, in perpetuity, and it's very much kind of dependent on his own vision and so forth. And it's quite a different thing to the UN. Not that I don't have critiques of the UN as well, but you can kind of see this sort of something's going on here with the international system kind of splitting somehow. And it's all, I think the bigger picture is this, maybe what we can call Cold War II, that's underway and probably is going to get a bit hotter this year as well. So you can look at all these things that are happening, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's what's happening in Iran, and see them as actually their kind of plays in this second Cold War and this big rivalry between the US and China. And again, this Pluto-Neptune cycle that I've been talking about already, this last phase of it seems to me to suggest that there's going to be one kind of like a second Cold War, a mini Cold War, that will play out over the next years, maybe into about the middle of the 2030s. So yeah, I think that's the big picture that we kind of want to bear in mind. But then we can also just take the Gnostic perspective and say, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I'm going to go and meditate.
I love that. Well, that's my morning in front of the fireplace. I certainly I do know what I can change and what I can't. And one of them is the global political empire building stories that are happening right now. I think that if you look at Saturn and Neptune from an architecture, like an archetypal sort of vibe, right? And you think about Neptune being somewhat ability to almost hypnotize people, like mesmerism and Neptune are very interconnected. And then we put that conjunction back in Capricorn in 1989. The mesmerism or the hypnosis or the trance state that we were lulled into was there's a safe world order. There's rules and laws. We touched on that, right? And Saturn says, yeah, we got this. Like we wrote them down even, you know what I mean? And then here we are. What is the mesmerism? Or as Liz Grin says, the trickiest thing about Neptune is its glamour. It'll glamorize things for you. It'll glamorize AI. It'll glamorize war. Like the Civil War, these young guys ran into war. They had to induce conscription in the United States because people started to see that it was actually horrific. People were getting cannon foddered and dying, and it was awful. But the Neptune will glamorize something for us in the next year or two, where we all think at first it's wonderbar, and then we go, oh wait a minute, maybe it's not, which leads us to conscription as well. Typically, Neptune can bring conscription movements in other countries besides the United States. Well, he's in Neptune. Well, he's in Aries because it's a sign of war. And what is Neptune? Neptune's glamour. It's like that vibe of like, you're going to find like wow, this is amazing. Like it's such an adventure. Let me get my lightsaber.
Yeah, we can definitely expect stuff like that, I think, coming in.
I don't think it'll work. I don't think it'll work.
Maybe not. I mean, Saturn also trying to introduce, rules about war. You have to fight. You have to join the army. We've got the Russians are going to invade Europe any minute, so you best sign up immediately. We're going to hear a lot of that kind of stuff, I think, and yeah, attempts to force people into this stuff. Saturn is not the most effective in Aries, so maybe these, as you say, these attempts won't work so well. But
that's hopeful. Yeah,
it's hopeful. It is hopeful. I do think, yeah, there's going to be a lot of, as you say, attempts to glamorize these things and make people feel like they have to get involved in these kind of elite machinations and big picture battles and so forth. A little bit scary.
So one of the things you probably have noticed, and so have I, that Neptune kind of, because he makes the unreal real, and he can rule like the glamorization as well as the fog machine of life. To me, it's like we'll be seeing in the movies that are rolling out, right? Probably last summer, I should have been paying more attention. What rolled out last summer, right? When we had, June, July, August, both Saturn and Neptune together. The movies that roll, I don't care if they were produced before then, they were rolled out during that time. And also this April, May, February, March, April, May. What movies are coming into our zeitgeist? Because those films will carry this signature in some way of what this glamorization will end up looking like and how we can almost diagnose it by the film industry.
I don't tend to follow what's going on in the movies that closely, actually. But one thing that my friend and colleague S.J. Anderson has talked about is the Odyssey. I think is it Christopher Nolan or somebody big is making a film version of the Odyssey. So this kind of like great epic myth of adventure and exploration and so forth.
Well, that's class. That's perfect for Aries and the Neptune Saturn energy.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the one example that I know of, and it'll probably make quite a big splash, and it definitely feels fitting. Also with Saturn as well, ancient things, old things, right? This is a very old myth that's being brought back in new form.
Yeah, but it's interesting because Saturn, so we're going to get this done. We could talk all day, but Saturn, when he was Capricorn Neptune conjunction 89, it saw the rollout of all this historical historical movies like Schindler's List and stuff, Dark Side, Death, History, you know what I mean? But then maybe glamorizing Team Right versus Team Wrong, because anytime you have a war story, the victors wrote the story. So we could say that happened. And there was a lot of, I didn't like any of the movies during that era because I'm not really into historical movie. I like movies more fantastical. And we did have that too. So there's a bit of both. Can't wait to see what movies come out this February, March and April, mid-February or March and April, probably March and April more so, because it kind of be, I think, like an emblematic keynote of what's coming.
You would have to think there's probably going to be quite a lot of action movies, right? With Neptune and Aries, I would guess over the next 15 years or so, as if we need more.
Oh yeah, it could be, or glamorizations of things that are Neptunian. But I mean, I don't think it's going to be glamorizing drugs. I think that sailed. That whole thing is sailed. I don't think people glamorize drugs anymore, but they could. I know really gripping thrillers about the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, drugs are out.
Drugs are out. Well, but not psychedelics. They're in. So maybe it'll be more about a pioneering technologies or pioneering medical treatments using psychedelics, right? So we'll see. Or people go to the movie theater, pop some mushrooms, and it's now available at instead of getting your candy bar and your bag of potato chips, you get your shrooms before you watch the movie. Oh, I wouldn't doubt that. We have legal shroom stores all over Vancouver, Canada. Just walk in and get your shrooms. So,
I could see.
All right. Not that I use shrooms myself. All right, my dear, that was a lot of fun. Do you have any last words? Like, if you were to say, looks like we're going to go through a difficult time, lots of control, maybe some precipitation of empire building that includes war. Is there one thing that you have, like, you could lose sleep over in your own world, like, because you think at night, oh no, and that would be over the next year or two, because Saturn and Neptune are still pretty close together, especially the next year. And is there anything that you think is really like, wow, I'm excited about this in the next year? Like, I can't wait to see how this shows up for me, because I know you're going to go with the UFOs, but help me answer those questions, please. I'll let you out of here.
I think in the first few months of the year, there's a lot of Aries energy, right? And I am a bit nervous about that right now, given where the world is already. And so I think given what we saw last year as well, we can see a lot of intensification of conflict. I think Iran is definitely on the menu, and perhaps also some escalation, maybe Russia, Ukraine as well. NATO could get involved. That's kind of what I'm worried about. I feel like if we get through to May and all hell hasn't broken loose, then maybe we're looking good. And what I'm most excited about, I'm excited about stuff coming out about ancient history and the UFO phenomenon and all these kind of things. I think that's also going to be a big feature of the year. And yeah, that's what really excites me.
Me too. The second one, I have been thinking about this one for 26, 27 for a while, based on all the cycles you and I know about, like using the archetypal explorer graph and going, we're hitting a nice cycle for some real breakthrough, wonderment, and hopefully collective acknowledgement that the UFO phenomena, whatever it is a real phenomena. And it's going to be exciting to see what we uncover or learn in 26 and into 27. And I agree with you. Unfortunately, that April timeframe is like a Kalasarpa yoga, bunch of planets bundled on one side of the north and the south node, all piled up. Pluto is the only guy out on the other side of the nodal axis, and it's going to be a pile up of a century in Aries within the bounds of one side of the nodes. So that is a little bit of like, it's my birthday month. I'm baking that into my solar return. Wish me luck.
You'll get a lot done this year, I'm sure.
I'll get a lot done, is right. Oh my God, I so enjoy playing on TV with you. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to put this video out. You guys are going to be, we're recording way back on January 28th, but you guys will be seeing it sometime in mid-February. Dan, thank you so very much. And I will definitely make sure every one of your links is below. And if any of you haven't checked out Substack and you want intelligent discourse when you read any of the writing there, but we have a nice astrology community building. People give really good, intelligent responses. It's not like knee-jerk, flame-warring, trolling land. It's such a nice place to hang out. So come on over and visit Dan over there, and me too. But go check him out, because it's nice to read, and it's nice to have conversations about things with people, and people are being nicer.
Yes, I agree. It is a nice place, and there's a lot of really good, intelligent astrology writing on there as well. So
there is really good astrology writing over there, and even the non-astrology writing is really good over there. So I think it's like we have a different vibe over there. So far, so good. Even people with their political views are not doing ad hominem attacks on people. People are talking ideas, and it's so refreshing.
I agree.
All right. Thanks, my dear. I'm going to stop the recording and say goodbye to you privately. So everyone go check out Dan's website, worldastrologyreport.com. Go check him out on YouTube, and links below, and Substack. And you just call yourself World Astrology at Substack?
World Astrology Report.
Report, of course. World Astrology Report. Right, it's written right behind you. Okay, I'll say goodbye to you privately. Bye, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe my channel, and go subscribe to Dan. This is a join button below for him too, because we're doing a collab, but make sure you give him some love as well.
Lunatic Astrology.